This is week 13, carrier screening for genetic disorders and principles of dysmorphology and common syndromes, part 1. The learning objectives for this week are to discuss the rationale behind carrier screening, discuss examples of ethnicity-based carrier screening, reliability and accuracy, citing specific early examples in screening for hemoglobinopathies and screening for Tay-Sachs disease, discuss the possible reasons for successful or less than successful outcomes, to discuss opportunities and challenges in integrating carrier screening into all specialties of genetic counseling practice. Additional learning objectives are to be familiar with fundamentals of human embryologic development, to identify critical time periods in fetal development, to list environmental factors that result in embryo and fetal loss, altered physical development, dysmorphic features, and to list common syndromes resulting from environmental influences on fetal development. What is genetic carrier screening? It is the application of genetic testing to specific populations independent of a family history of a disorder. It is the testing that is done to see whether you or your partner carry a genetic mutation that could cause a serious inherited disorder in your baby. Until 1969, when the doctors discovered the enzyme that made testing possible to determine whether parents were carriers of Tay-Sachs, there were about 50 to 60 Jewish children born each year in the United States and Canada who had Tay-Sachs. After the mass screenings began in 1971, the numbers declined to 2 to 5 Jewish births a year. The first mass screening was held on a rainy Sunday afternoon in May 1971 at the Congregation Bel Al in Bethesda, Maryland. The site was chosen because it was near Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. Michael Kabak was the main individual, Dr. Michael Kabak, who was responsible for setting up this first major screening program. The screenings used blood tests to check for the missing enzyme that identified the parent as a Tay-Sachs carrier. With the help of 40 trained lay volunteers and 15 physicians, more than 1,500 people volunteered for testing and were processed through the system in about 5 hours. Dr. Michael Kabak later, in writing an article in Genetics and Medicine, said, "For me, it was like having written a symphony and hearing it for the first time. And it went beautifully without glitches." I'd like you to read the article from Israel, which talks about this screening program. And I also like to share something that I read in the article, which I found very moving, and I think that you will too. And that is that there is a moment when parents first learn that their child has been diagnosed with the fatal disease. Then there's the moment when the child's condition has deteriorated so badly, when they're blind, paralyzed, and non-responsive, that he or she has to be hospitalized. And then there's the moment, usually by age 5, when the child dies. So that parents with children born with Tay-Sachs are said to talk about a death that occurs 3 times with the child. Even today, the Tay-Sachs screening program, which began in 1971, remains a model for mobilizing a community to fight a genetic disease. Now, some disease mutations are found to be quite common in Ashkenazi Jews compared to the general population, and the Ashkenazi Jewish population makes up about 90% of the American Jewish population. And some of these diseases include Tay-Sachs and other lysosomal storage diseases, and some forms of breast cancer. What has happened in actuality is that during the time period of about 900 years ago, a bottleneck occurred in Europe that led to a founder effect in the Ashkenazi population that has in turn led to a number of recessive disorders that are seen at a higher frequency in this group. Now, the mutations were common among this population because Ashkenazi Jews tend to marry within their own populations, and at this time, European Jews were prohibited by the church from accepting converts to Judaism. If you'd like to learn more about Dr. Michael Kabak, you can go to this link and you can learn about how he has worked to eradicate Tay-Sachs from the Jewish population in the United States and in Israel. So today it is extremely rare to find a baby with Tay-Sachs, and this individual is usually not of Jewish descent. Today we have made so much progress that the Jewish population can be screened for over 200 diseases with an at-home mail-in test offered by JScreen. It is a 4-year-old nonprofit affiliated with Emory University's Department of Human Genetics. They've screened thousands of people, and the test costs $149, which includes genetic counseling. And I have included a link to the website for the testing at Emory, and then I also included the link for showing you what the diseases are that are screened for by the JScreen. This is a poster from Great Britain showing a screening program for 9 conditions, including Tay-Sachs, for the Ashkenazi Jewish population in Great Britain. It's interesting that this week I spoke to a rabbi from Great Britain, and she told me that 2 Jewish individuals cannot marry in Great Britain unless they have been tested for Tay-Sachs to see what their carrier status is. And I thought that was interesting to discuss and to tell you about, since I assigned you a discussion question on who is being tested, etc., for different diseases, and should you make people be tested. So I just wanted to put that in there. Since the cloning of the gene for hexaminidase A, hexa, which it is known as, more than 100 distinct mutations have been found. Testing of 2 mutations detects upward of about 94% of Ashkenazi Jewish carriers. When we take a look at the mutation analysis, it does not detect 100% of Ashkenazi Jewish carriers, so that the enzyme analysis, the biochemical test, still remains the gold standard for carrier detection of for Tay-Sachs. And one of the things that's quite interesting is that the diversity of the mutations was not expected. If only the founder effect was coming into play here to why so many people who are from Ashkenazi Jewish descent carry the gene. So there might be a heterozygote advantage. However, this currently has not been verified, but population genetic studies have not revealed strong evidence for positive selection at the hexa locus also. Now, if we go on to the next slide, you will see some ideas of what possibly might be the heterozygote advantage. Although it's controversial, it has been hypothesized that the perpetuation of this allele for Tay-Sachs is associated with the selective advantage because it provides protection against tuberculosis. It protects one against the bacteria, Mycobacteria tuberculosis, which is a highly infectious disease. And so it has been suggested that Ashkenazi Jews were subjected to a stronger selective force, more so than any other ethnic groups, due to the fact that they lived in crowded town environments, and they did not move out of these areas much. And also has been observed that by the populations of Ashkenazi Jews had a lower frequency of tuberculosis-related deaths when you compare them to the non-Jewish populations who live in similar areas. Another study has shown that the frequency of the Tay-Sachs gene in Ashkenazi Jews is correlated with areas of the highest tuberculosis incidence, suggesting a protective effect. We do, however, now know that carriers of the Tay-Sachs gene have increased production of the beta subunit of hexaminidase. And this beta subunit is closely associated with increased host defense against mycobacterium. So that's very important. And also the fact that we have so much drug-resistant tuberculosis today, this fact that the beta subunit of hexaminidase um, has a protective mechanism is going to be important for the future. This next slide is showing you New York City in the areas where the Ashkenazi Jewish population went to when they came to the United States. And you can see how crowded that it is, and you know that there's going to be the sanitary conditions would not be very good, and they'd be ripe for something like tuberculosis.